Hi, I'm Paul and thanks for watching another of my Powerapps videos. This one is part 4 in the series I've been doing on using cognitive services with Powerapps and playing around with the ComputerVision API and seeing what we can come up with. I'm doing this session in my very fine new Powerapps hat, courtesy of Brian Dang. So a literal hat tip to Mr. Dang for letting me have his hat, and for my new boss at Datacom, Richard, for bringing it all the way back from Seattle to Christchurch. Okay, so let's jump back into the app that I showed you in part 1. So we showed you all these different scenarios, all these different things that we could do with cognitive services and Powerapps. So we started with doing tagging and captioning a picture using the add picture control. Then we went on to doing some OCR, optical character recognition, from the camera control. And this time we're going to have a look at captioning and tagging again, but this time from the camera control, and this time using a slightly different technique, which gives us a few more possibilities, a little bit more information. So let's just demonstrate that app to you quickly now. So here we are. I've just got a couple of objects here on the table set up that I am going to use as a quick test. So here is a bottle of wine, and we're going to hit the analysis button on there. And that image is being sent off to cognitive services. It's analysing it, and we're getting some information back. So things that it thinks are in the picture and its degree of confidence. So it's pretty certain that there's a window, that we're indoors, that there's a beverage, it's an alcoholic beverage, it's open, and it's a bottle. So that was pretty good going. We'll do one more with this TV remote. Let's just try and get the image focused on that so we don't have too much other stuff in the background. So there we are, I've captured the image. I'm going to hit the analyze button. And again, the image gets sent off to cognitive services. We'll take it a few moments, and then we should get some responses back. So here we are. It's missed the remote control. It's got that there's a table and that it's a wooden table. Let's just try that one more time, because that was working before. Let's make it nice and big in the middle of the screen so it knows that's the subject. Analyze. Okay, there we are. So this time it's picked up that there's some electronics on the table as well. Sometimes it does actually come up with remote control on there. Okay, so I'll take you through how we build this app. So I'm going to jump into a completely blank screen here, so we can build the whole thing up from scratch. So we're going to start by putting in a camera control, obviously enough. So there's camera control and there's add picture control. There are some benefits to each of them. For working with cognitive services, probably the camera control is your better bet. So with the camera control, regardless of what device you're using, whether it's a high-end smartphone with a very high resolution camera, it will always give you a standard resolution, which is smaller, and that's good with cognitive services computer vision, because it only accepts images up to 4 megabytes, I think the limit is. So if you use the add picture control, you may well end up with a picture either that you've brought in from the gallery or that you've taken with a high-end smartphone, which is going to be too big to actually be analysed by the service. So for that and other reasons, just because it's a little bit easier, I'm going to use the camera control. So here we are. So we'll make that nice and big, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set up an image control alongside it, and that's just so that we can double check the image that we've taken before we send it off to cognitive services. So I'm just going to set this up now so that when we do the on select action, when we click on the camera, what we're going to do is we're going to store the image from the camera in a collection. So I'm going to use clear collect. I'm going to call my collection col photo for collection photo, and what I'm going to put in that collection is just going to be camera 2, because I was playing around earlier, dot photo. There we are. So now when we click on here, the image is being stored in the collection. We can see that by going to the View menu and Collections. We can see our collection there, Cold Photo, and in there we can see the image that we just took. And there's one column in the table that it creates, and the heading for that column is URL. I think it should really be URI, and that's the format that the picture is in. So there's something called URI picture format, and that's going to become important in just a moment. Okay, so now let's make our image show the picture that we just took. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we want to show what's in coldphoto.url. So remember, URL was the name of the column. Now that's not working for me because it's returning table values. So our collection could have multiple rows in it, and we haven't specified which row we want. So to specify the row we want, I'm going to say first, because we're using a clear collect, we're only ever going to have one photo in there. So we can just say we want the first row from Cold Photo, and the column that we want is the .url. So there. So now when I take images with the camera, let's just put something else in there. When I take an image, bang, we can see that it's in our collection, and also our image control is showing us what we've got in that collection. So that's great. Next thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to insert a button, which will be our button for sending this off for analysis. So there, we've got a button. Drag that onto the screen. Let's give it a double click and call it analysis. Now, in the first, well, it was the second video of the series. So in the second video of the series, we did something very similar to this, and we used one of the ComputerVision API calls, which is compatible with Powerapps, that we can call directly from within Powerapps. What we're going to do this time is we're going to use a different one which is not compatible with Powerapps, and so we're going to have to use Flow. But let me just quickly show you why we can't use it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go to my View, go to Data Sources, add a data source, and we'll select the ComputerVision API as soon as it pops up. So this is just to explain why it's not going to work from directly within Powerapps. Now, I'm making this video at the beginning of August 2018. It may be, you know, if you're watching this a few months down the line, that this particular limitation has been sorted out within Powerapps. But let's just quickly show you what that limitation is, make things a little bit clearer. So I'm going to go to my analysis button, the on select. I'm going to go through my ComputerVision API options. This time we want to use AnalyzeImage, and what you'll notice is the first thing it says to you, the first argument you've got to give it is, are you sending me image content? Are you actually sending me an image, or are you sending me an image URL? Now that's URL as in a link to an image, so an image perhaps that's already on a web page somewhere. And at the moment, Powerapps can't really handle this, because depending on which one of these you choose, then the subsequent arguments change. So if I choose image content, then it's going to want some binary data. If I choose image URL, then it's going to want a string URL for that link. And Powerapps can't handle this sort of argument at the moment. So we're going to have to go beyond Powerapps, and we're going to have to get Flow involved. So Flow is our glue, if you like, our little bit of translator in the middle, which is going to be able to accept an image from Powerapps, send that image off to the AnalyzeImage service, and then get the results back and return those results back to Powerapps for us. So as I say, hopefully In the coming months this limitation will be resolved, but for right now this is how we can do it, and it's not too complicated, and it also starts getting us involved in messing around with flow, and flow is a great way of extending Powerapps to work with other services. So let's look at that. So I'm just going to have the button selected, choose action, and then choose flows. I've got a whole bunch of flows here that I've been messing around with before, but as I say, I'm going to do the whole thing from scratch. So I'm going to create a new flow. So this brings me into flow, and then it should actually start a new flow for me. So if we just wait patiently for a moment. Here we go. So it's created a new flow. It's called that flow Powerapps button, but we'll change the name of that in a second. And it's given us a Powerapps trigger. Now the first thing that we need to do is we need to say that we want to request from Powerapps a file, an image that we're going to work with. Now we can't actually specify that within this trigger step. What we've got to do is create a step that asks for an image or that asks for a file, and then we can specify in that we want to get it from Powerapps. So even though we don't want to actually save an image here, I'm going to use the action create file just so that I've got something that will request a file. So here we are. So I'm going to say create file. I'll do it from SharePoint, but you could do it from OneDrive or Azure Blob Storage, whatever, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to pop some details in here. So we've got to actually fill this out with valid information. So I'll go to this library and I'll call the file test JPG, and then this is the part that we need. So for the file content, I want to ask in Powerapps. So this is going to mean that the button in Powerapps it is going to call this flow, and when we call this flow, we're going to be able to put in a parameter, an argument for the file content, which is actually going to be the image. So here we are, asking Powerapps. Now I need another step. So we covered this in the OCR session, but when we pull the information in from Powerapps, it's going to be in this URI format, and we need to have it in a binary format because that's what the computer vision service works with. So I'm going to add a compose step. So a compose step allows us to make changes to some data. It's a data operation. So data operations compose, and then in here I'm going to click into the box so that I get my expression list and my dynamic content to come up, and I'm going to create an expression, and my expression is going to be data URI to binary. So I want to convert something from data URI format to binary format. What is it that I want to create? What is it that I want to convert? Okay, what I want to convert, if I can just get it so I can see the dynamic content again, is the data. Just scroll around a little bit, try and get my screen organized. There we are. Is my file content. So that's what I want to convert. So that is the image that we've asked Powerapps to provide. So there we are. I'm going to click that. So now we can see this is called workflow definition language, and most of the time we can have it build up for us out of this dynamic content and this expression box. Sometimes we have to handcraft that, but fortunately not for the session that we're doing today. So I'm going to hit the OK button, which is going to populate that compose box. So now we've got the image ready to send in the format that we want. We're going to add another step, and this one is going to be our computer vision step. So you need to have signed up for the computer vision service. It's free, and I showed you how to do that in part 2. So if you haven't done that yet, the first few minutes of part 2 go through how you can get that set up for free. Okay, so I'm going to use this AnalyzeImage option. There we are. And now we can see here, just like in Powerapps, it's asking us for the image source. So the image source in this case is actually going to be image content. I'm not going to go and point to a link somewhere to get the image from. I've got the image data ready, image content. And now what you'll see is in Flow, this box is then able to say to me, what is your image content? So this is the part that Powerapps can't handle, this sort of cascading argument idea where you choose one option in the first argument and then the next argument changes what it's looking for. Okay, so what we want to put in here, again we're going to use our dynamic content box. We don't want to put in this create file part, remember that's in the URI format. We want to go to our compose step, so we're going to say pull the output of the compose step, which should be our picture in binary format, and use that. So I'm now going to click that. Fantastic. Okay, so we're now able to ask Powerapps to provide us with the file. We're able to convert the file into the binary format that the ComputerVision API wants. We're then going to call the AnalyzeImage function of the ComputerVision API and send it the image that we've taken from the camera. So what we're not doing yet is returning anything to Powerapps. Let's just show you a little bit about why that is. If I add a new step here and say I want to return things to Powerapps, so this is the method we used when it was the OCR, because with OCR we were just sending a string of information back, and we were able to handle that with this response to Powerapps step. But you'll see here that our limits, our options for what we send back to Powerapps are somewhat limited. We can send text or a yes, no, or a file or an email or a number. What we can't do is send tabular data, and tabular data is what's going to come out of this AnalyzeImage step. So we've got to learn how we can send tabular data to Powerapps. So let's have a little look at that now. So I'm going to take this step back out again. And so that we've actually got something we can look at, I am going to actually run this in Powerapps, and then I can look in the run history, and we can actually look a little bit under the covers, see what's going on, and that's going to help us perform the next steps in the operation. So let me just give this a name. I tend to prefix my flows with the name of the trigger. So I'm going to start with PA because this is a flow being triggered from within Powerapps. And we'll call it Analyze Picture. I don't think I've got one of those yet. So let's save that. And then when that finishes saving, I'm going to jump back into Powerapps, and their Analyze Picture has just popped up at the bottom of the list there. So I'm going to select that, and it's going to take a second or two to add this in, because it's actually querying Flow, and it's saying to Flow, okay, for this particular flow, this Analyze Picture flow, what information needs to be supplied, what information is going to come back. So we can see here it's put in this analyze picture.run, and the argument that it's asking for is the file content. So remember, our file content is just going to be the first of col photo.url. So there we go. And there's no information for us to bring back yet. We've got no return step at the moment. So let's run this. So we'll see the little dots going across the top that shows it's running. Nothing's going to happen anymore on the screen other than when that finishes, the button should become live again. So let's go look in our flow. Sorry, let me just try to get to the flow without bringing up the video controls. and we're going to have a look in the flow history. So I'm just using the back button there, and now I can see the run history. And if I go into the run history, what I can see is the actual data that has been flowing back and forth around the system. So it's telling me that my flow ran successfully, so that's good news. So here we are, so we can see in here the various steps. So for example, if we open up create file, we can see what happened there. That one's not terribly exciting, but for the compose, we can see, okay, the input's a bit large, so it's not showing us the input, but I could click to download it. The output of this was an image in JPEG format, and that is the actual data. There's an awful lot of it, so I'm not going to scroll all the way across, but the more interesting bit I want to get to is this AnalyzeImage, and we can see that what went into it was our JPEG image. What came out of it, okay, what came out of it was a series of information. We had some captions, so we had a caption of a bottle of wine next to a keyboard. We have a series of tags, words that help describe the image, the objects in the image and what's happening in the image. And if we hit see more, we've got some more options. We've got categories that it might fall into, and then we've got tags which also have a confidence score alongside them as well. So that's the information that we want to return to Powerapps. So how are we going to do that? We will show you in just 1 second. So let's go into edit. So our information that we want to return is not just you know, a static piece of text or a yes no value. We're going to have to use a different way of getting our information to Powerapps, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a request response step. So I'm going to open this up to show you what it looks like. There is one other task that we're going to have to do before we can fill this out, but it's going to make more sense, I think, if I show you this first, and then we'll fill it out in a moment. So with our request response step, what we can do is we can send some information back. So for example, I could send back everything. I could send back the whole body of the data that came from AnalyzeImage, or just the captions, or just the categories, or the descriptions, or the tag names, and so on. So I can choose what I want to send back. So I can select any of those, and what I'll do is I will do tags first, and then we'll have a look at a more advanced technique of getting all of that information back in one go, but let's start with tags. But to fill this out, I need to put in what's called a JSON schema. So what's that all about then? So JSON is JavaScript object notation, and it's a way of describing data. So it's similar to sort of XML and the like. And what Flow wants us to do, or what this step wants us to do, is to describe the information which we are going to output. So down here we can see for tags, it's tags identified with a confidence score. We've got to fill in down here something that says, okay, you're going to get a tag name, and you're going to get a tag confidence score, and it's going to be this data type, and this is what it's going to look like. And so that is awkward to handcraft, but we don't need to do that. Let me show you a little trick. So I'm going to have to delete this step out because we're not quite ready to put this in yet, because we've got to work out how we're going to generate this JSON schema. So I'm going to delete this out, and then we're going to get some sample information. I'll show you how to do that, and then we're going to load that in as example data. So you can use example data or a sample payload to automatically generate this schema for you. So let's do that. I'm going to delete that step. I'm going to add another step, This is going to be a compose, and the only reason I'm adding this compose step is so I can get under the surface, under the hood, pull out the data that we want to work with, and then use that as my payload. So let's do our data operations compose. And then what I'm going to do, I'll start with the tags. So that's the tag along with a confidence score. And I'm going to save that. And because I've run this before, I don't actually have to go back into Powerapps and run it again. I can actually use the test option. And I can say, look, just run this flow again, but use the data from a previous run. So I've got one previous run that was 5 minutes ago. It succeeded. That's the one that I'm going to use. So I'm just going to hit the test button on here. And my flow is going to run again. So there we are, flow ran successfully, that's nice. And because I am in this mode here, where I can get behind the surface of things, I can see what was the output of that tags property from AnalyzeImage. So what I can do now is I can take this and use it as my sample payload. So I'm going to highlight all of the output. I'm going to copy that to the clipboard. Then I'm going to go into my edit mode. I'm going to add a new step. I'm going to put that response step back in because now we've got the information we need to complete it. So here we are, request response. And in here I can say the thing I want to return is the tags. So make sure you get these right. If you've got the payload for tags, make sure you choose tags from here. So tags, and then into my sample payload, I'm just going to Control V, paste that information, the sample information in here, click on done, and now the JSON schema has been created for me. So you can see there it's saying it's expecting two items. It's expecting something called name, which is going to be a string, and something called confidence, which is going to be a number. And down here it's telling us that both of those columns are required. So that's great. I don't actually need this compose step anymore. Delete that out. Doesn't do any harm to leave it in, but just to keep things tidy and demonstrate that it's not required for the flow to run, I'm going to save that. And then I'm going to go back into Powerapps. Here we go. Not sure what's happened to my photo control there. But what I'm going to have to do here now is I'm going to have to get rid of my connection or data source, which is my PA analyze picture. The reason I've got to get rid of that is it's only when I first add it into Powerapps that Powerapps interrogates Flow, and it says to Flow, okay, what information do we need to give you, and what information are you going to give back? So we've changed it now. Before it wasn't giving back any information, now it is giving back information. So we're going to have to remove this and re-add it again. So let's do that. So I've removed it, and I'm going to go back into my button, and I'm going to go back to my actions and my flows. I'm going to select it again. So that pause while it's saying adding, that's where it's communicating with Flow, and it's saying, okay, what are the parameters, the input parameters, and what are the output parameters? So there we are, that's in there now. So I can again put in my first col photo.url, and what I can do now that it's giving me some results is I can collect those results. So remember, this is tabular data, so I can create a little collection called, let's call this one called tags, because it's tags that are coming back. Make sure I close all my brackets appropriately, and now that's done, I'm going to use the analysis button again click on that, and we can see the little dots racing across the top of the screen. And that's brought the information back. I haven't chosen to display any of that information yet, but we can see it if we go into our view and collections. Here is our col tags, and now we can see it could see the table, the keyboard. It got said keyboard rather than remote control, but we can see that the information is now coming back from Flow in this tabular format. So if we wanted to show that information, that's dead straightforward. We could do that in a variety of ways. For speed, let's do it in a data table. So I'm just going to connect my data table to col tags. Say that I want to show the confidence level and the name. There we are. I might want to put those in the other order, so name and then confidence. And we can see we've got our information now. I can just put that underneath where the picture is. So that's what we had in our example one. It was coming back with the name and it was coming back with the confidence score. So let's go a step further, because this wasn't the only thing that came back. There were also categories and there was also a description. So what if we want to bring all of that information back into Powerapps, and to do that in a single step? So we could easily create several other flows. This one was bringing back tags. We could create another flow which brought back the description, and another flow which brought back the categories. But let's have a go at pulling all of that information back all at once. So let's see what that looks like. So what I want to do here is I'm going to put this compose step back in. So this is a really useful little trick for just, as I say, looking behind the scenes. So let's do a compose step. And what I'm going to show here this time is I'm going to show the whole body. Show me everything that comes back, not just the tags or the categories or the caption. Show me everything, and then I'm going to try and bring all of that back into Powerapps. So I'm going to use the test option again. So I can pick from any of my previous runs just to use the same parameter information, the same image. And off that runs, and now I can look under the hood and I can see what came back from my AnalyzeImage step. So we can do what we did before. We can highlight all of this. There we go. So that's all the information that we wanted. We can then go into the edit mode and we can change this response step. So this time we don't just want the tags, we want everything. That's everything in the body of the returned message from the AnalyzeImage step. And we're going to use our sample payload again. So let's delete out the payload we've got at the moment. Or sorry, delete out the schema we've got at the moment. Put in our payload. Hit done. Now we've got a more complicated JSON schema. But it's a JSON schema that knows what to do with all of the information that's been returned by the AnalyzeImage step. So let's save that. And now we're going to return to Powerapps. Now remember, we have now changed the output of the Analyze Picture flow. So I'm going to have to delete this flow out and put the flow back in again. So let's do that. So I'm going to go to View, Data Sources. I'm going to delete this data source. Now, so that I don't have to type this formula in again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an additional button. And in this button, I'm going to go to Action, Flows. I'm going to select this flow, which is going to bring this back in again as a data source. So here as it's bringing it in, as I say, it's having a look at what are the required input parameters and the required output parameters. So that's fine now. That's all I had to do, because this is now a connection. If I went and viewed my data sources list, I'd see it back in there again. It's now sorted. So I can delete that one out because I've still got the formula here that I wanted. And we are going to click on the button again. We won't worry about changing the picture for the moment. So that's running with the same picture. Now let's go and look in our collections and our tags collection. And now we've got something similar to what we saw in video 2 of this series. We've got a very complicated set of return data. So we've got a table. This is the col tags table. In this table we've got just one row but a series of columns. We've got one column that's called categories, and that has a table inside it, and if we click on that table we can see that it's been categorized as others with a relatively low score. There's a descriptions one. So here we've got a caption, a bottle of wine next to a keyboard. Sorry, jumped out too far there. And we've got tags as well. So there we can see the individual terms that were tagged. We've got some metadata, which is just some information about the picture itself, a request ID, and then tags, and that was the one with the name and the confidence against it. So what we can do now is we can show several different pieces of the information. So what we'll do is we will show the name and the confidence again, so that's the tag name and the confidence again, and also we'll show you the caption that it came up for the image as well. So what we need to do then is we need to sort of navigate our way through that complex structure in our collection. So we're going to have to go into col tags, we're going to have to go into the first row, we're going to have to go into the description table, and then we're going to have to go into the we'll do the captions. So here we are. So let me insert a label. So let's do the caption first. Put the caption over here near the image. So in here I want to go and get the first row from col photo, and then I'm going to have to remind myself the col tags it's still called. So the first row from col tags, and then what was it? It was description, I think. And then we've got to go inside description, and we want to get the caption. So there we are. Now it's giving a little red squiggly line. So it's saying that what we're getting back from caption is actually tabular data. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to say that we're going to want to have the first thing back from captions. So let's just sort that out. So we're going to want to get the first row from the captions table. So we're going to have to wrap this whole thing in another first. There we are, and then we can put a dot on the end of that, and we can say we want to bring back the text of the caption. So there we are, we've got our caption, a bottle of wine next to a keyboard. Now this does take a little bit of experimenting and getting your head around, so it's often a good idea to in your collection have a good look in there and kind of map out your route to the piece of data that you want. So we had to get the first row from column tags, we had to get the item from the description column, and then within that we had to go into the captions table, and then we wanted the first row of that and the text that we found within there. So it does take a little bit of experimenting and a little bit of navigating to find your way to the piece of data that you want, but the advantage is that you're just doing one call to flow and you're getting all of this information back in one hit, and then you can choose which pieces of information that you want, rather than, as I say, perhaps having to have multiple flows, calling it multiple times and just pulling back one piece of information or one set of data each time. So let's see if we can populate this data table again. So at the moment, this is just based on col tags. So let's have a little think about our route in here, see if we can get this one right. So we're going to have a first around col tags, so that we're bringing things in from the first row. And then I think we want the tags column, and then within that we're going to want to have this table of information. So the first of col tags, and then the tags column. So let's see if we can get that right. So let's have the first from col tags, and then we want the tags column. There we are, beautiful. So now we've got our name and our confidence score coming in there as well. So awesome, we've managed to put that whole thing together, and there are some lessons in there, or some techniques in there, which I think are valuable to know for Powerappers, whether or not you're intending to use the computer vision stuff or not. So remember, you can use Flow to act as a go-between to services that Powerapps can't communicate with directly, and you can use this response option to return data which is more complicated than can be returned by the normal Powerapps response step. The Powerapps response step at the moment is quite basic, whereas this request response step allows us to fold all of our information into this JSON format, as long as we provide a JSON schema for it, and then we can push all of that information down into Powerapps, into a collection of a complex type where we've got tables within tables. But we can then, in Powerapps, just use our combinations of things like first to pull out the information that we need. Okay, I hope that's been interesting. Like I say, lessons in there that are useful whether or not you're using the computer vision service. So as ever, if you like the video, please subscribe. That helps to encourage me to make more videos. And please do leave comments if you've taken the time to watch this video. Please let me know what you thought of it. Other things that you might like me to cover, things that maybe I didn't go into enough depth, or things I went into too much depth, so I know what to cover in future episodes. Okay, thanks very much, and enjoy your Powerapps.